All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session to share a little bit about what's going on in the Australian context, particularly around transforming students' curriculum assessment and what our institutions look like in Australia through the use of e-portfolios. I am Kate Coleman and I am on the board of directors of AAEEBL. I have been for some years and was very lucky to have normally been physically with you. But today I am joined by some amazing colleagues in Australia, and I'm sitting here in the graduate school at the University of Melbourne after a huge day of teaching music education before they head into art education with me tomorrow. We are in the midst of semester here with winter break just finishing up, so it's a hard time for us to be physically with you, but hopefully you can engage with us in this session and stay in contact with our presenters today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context about how we all know each other and the context that we work in Australia. If I can click forward, maybe not. Try it a different way. So hello from Australia. This is our ePortfolios Australia logo. We're an affiliate of AAEEBL. We, as an AAEEBL community, have affiliates all over the world, and those affiliates enable us to move back and forward in our communities and share our research and practice, but also to be able to support each other at particular times in conferences. So for this one, this is co-sponsored by ePortfolios Australia, and when we host our annual meeting in Australia, we will be co-sponsored by AAEEBL. So a little tiny map of Australia so you have an understanding of how we work. Our institutions are similar in terms of the requirements that we have in higher education, but each of our spaces work quite differently in ePortfolios. We don't all have an ePortfolio vendor. We might actually be using multiple folios within the one university. Some universities have a purchased portfolio and that's used blanket across. Some universities like mine have 3 portfolios running as well as outward facing public sites. Each of us does our own thing, and even in programs you might have a course who's actually purchased the use of an e-portfolio inside a master's program, for instance, or a professional undergraduate program, and then that whole program might just be in it and the rest of the university might not be. So we're in a really interesting space to think about what it is when we think about transformation in higher education and how e-portfolios enable that transformation for the institution and enable that transformation for assessment and what assessment as learning looks like in our context, which is a little bit different every now and again. So who we are a body of volunteers, just like AAEEBL, a group of people who work together with the amazing Alison smiling there at us from the middle. Alison is one of those people, if you have met her, who is able in her gregariousness to pull people together and do stuff for her. And as all ePortfolio people are, most of us are quite willing and able to jump up when we need to share the work that we're doing with our students and share the work that we're doing with our colleagues. There's a heap of stuff happening in ePortfolios Australia. There's an upcoming annual conference, but here is the information that you will at least be able to join with us across the world on for an upcoming webinar. There's 2 or 3 held a year. This one in September is around folio, social media and digital identity, which I know will interest lots of you. And the ePortfolios Australia WordPress site is the space to go to pick up information on us and also to have a look at the past webinars. They're an interesting space to go to, just like the EPAC webinars, to pick up on different aspects of cases that might be happening in programs. Helen runs a great webinar series and we run a similar one here as a kind of community of practice coming together to share our work. The upcoming forum has Tristan Hooley from the UK as our keynote. It's in Canberra. If you haven't been to us in Canberra during summer, it's a good visit from the other side of the world as you get cold. We're heading into the heat of summer in Canberra at this time, and will be a really great conference if any of you are able to attend. And there is some live streaming at this conference this year as well, so you will be able to participate in your late afternoons through into the evening. So today I'm joined by some colleagues that have been doing some great work for a long time. And that means that the work, for, at least in the way that I see it, has been transformational because it's shifted practice, it's shifted pedagogy, and these people are connected to me either personally or connected through other personal connections. Just like you at AAEEBL, ePortfolios Australia is all connected somehow. Our practices and research and pedagogies link us because we're learning off of each other. And out of each other's work and building on the work that's been done before us. Much of that work that's been done in North America and in Europe, a context that we continually look to think about the kinds of practices that we're doing here. So Kulari, if you would like to introduce you and your amazing institution to us, welcome.
Thank you, thanks Kate. I'm Kulari. So I work at Monash College, which is a fully owned subsidiary of Monash University. It's like a faculty of a bigger university. So the purpose of Monash College is to provide pathways to Monash University. So students who are mostly international students would come at 5 different entry points, either to learn English and then get into the university, or to do year 12 equivalent and then get into the university, or to do a first year course. So the size, just to give you an idea about what's the size of this organization, it's about 6,000 to 8,000 students with about 1,200 staff. So that's like a small part of the big university. So we do use Mahara as our e-portfolio system, which is fully integrated to our learning management system, which is Moodle. So with these two components together, I'm going to tell you how we are using the two integrated components within Monash College. So if you go to the next slide, that's where all the big things are happening. So the use case of portfolios. First is a reflective practice, which is our Diploma of Education has an evidence-based framework where students need to show their competency based on different aspects of a teacher qualification. So we use portfolio for this. In this scenario, we are going to set up the smart evidence, which is fairly new within Mahara, to put the framework. So we have used this for a couple of years now, and the big portion of this is students who are doing Diploma of Education do a weekly reflections about their findings. So they go to schools to practice, and then they collect all their evidence and create a portfolio for assessment as well as a reflective practice guide. So that's one of the biggest use cases. That's a very small portion within the college, but however, the use of portfolio is really important in this because it's the evidence and it's the competency. So not many of our courses are competency-based, but this one has a competency-based element as well as evidence. So that every trimester we deliver 2 units which has this type of highly reflective writing, which is challenging task for an international student whose language is English is their second language, but they have enjoyed it, and the chief examiner's report has been glowing. We just finished a trimester, and the chief examiner's report was shared with me, which is looking really great. So that's one aspect of it. So the second aspect is Monash professional pathways, which means the students who have completed their bachelor's or master's and who are getting ready to look for work, they come back to Monash College to do their, we call it Monash Professional Pathways, which is a 30-week program where they learn it's like work integrated. They learn how to present themselves at a job interview, how to write their CVs, and then they get placed in a real working environment. So as a central e-learning team, we recruit a lot of interns, and they are required to write a weekly reflection. So on first week, I think I make their life a little bit hard by asking them to write a reflection on a daily basis. That's the starting point so that I can give them feedback. That's not reflective enough. This is how you write reflection. So I take time to give feedback, and there are team leaders who take time to give feedback as well. But you see the picture on this slide, that's Esther, who's handing stew. She has been writing reflections, and it has been the best experience for both for her as well as for me. So I'm the employer for her, and I get to see how, if she's struggling, is she developing her skills, what are the areas. Some weeks I don't supervise her on a work basis. So when she writes the reflections, oh, this is what she has been doing. So it's building a good relationship between the employee and the employer, and also give them opportunities to develop their writing skills, language skills, things like that. So that's second way that we are using. We do have grants at the college. So we have teaching excellence grants. So every year we provide about 10 to 15 teaching excellence grants. And we have been using the portfolio tool for the teaching excellence grant recipients to write reflections. It's a very structured program. There are 4 or so points where they really have to do kind of an assessment type of thing, and part of that includes the reflections. So the last one is the team that I lead, the Central e-Learning team. They do the certified membership of Association for Learning Technology, the AAEEBL. And they need to write a reflective piece with evidence to become a member. And we have been using the portfolio that's provided within the college to get the certification. So that has been another real eye-opener for the team, for them to upskill themselves, as well as to understand, okay, when teachers use it, this is the problem. Therefore, what's the solution? So it has been a really good experience. So quickly, let's go to the next slide. With all these things, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of numbers here. So we do have about, I said, 6 to 10,000, 12,000 users. And we have about 678 e-portfolios. That's for a small institute like ours, that's a big number, I would say. And the number of pages is the most interesting one. So there are lots and lots of pages that these students or these users create. And that has been a great journey. We haven't been using this for too long. Most probably we started towards mid-2016. And 2016 to now, this is where we have ended up. So that's our story. And any questions or anything, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you. And I'm glad you got your email on there. Those numbers are pretty impressive for a small space. The number of pages is great. The current issue of the AAEEBL ePortfolio review is called Building Bridges. That just came out this week. And I was just thinking about that concept. It's exactly what you're doing by thinking about how a student learns to contextualize themselves in a city and a space and then an institution. And the way that you've done it is by centering everything on them. And you're using an ePortfolio to build multiple bridges, in a sense, in all of the sites that they're working in. It's lovely.
Yes, the Diploma of Education is really great, and the interns, it's fascinating the things that they write. And I mean, given any time, I have 6 to 8 interns at any given time. I personally have them. So it's interesting on a Friday afternoon when I read that and give feedback. It could be very short feedback that I give sometimes. Sometimes I pull the whole page and do a track change type of thing. So it depends on what it is.
It's fantastic and a huge amount of work. But shifting someone's practice like that is what ePortfolios can do, because you can give them multiple forms of feedback on multiple forms of pages.
That's
rather
right.
than just on one artifact. Fantastic. Thank you, Kulari. And your Twitter's there for people to follow you.
Yes.
You are someone very interesting to follow on Twitter, because it's not just ePortfolios, it's a whole heap of things in digital learning and teaching in higher education. So I would suggest following.
Thank you.
Jenny, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so you can see that my institutional experience here has been over the last 3 years, but in reality I've been using portfolios for a long, long time. I come from teacher education, and portfolios is something that we do in teacher education. So I'm working at the University of Tasmania, and I've been there in a number of I've been there for around 5 years. I've just got a message saying my computer is about to restart, but I hope it'll last. So we have become very serious about portfolios in the last 3 years. You can see that in 2017 we did a scoping project where we looked at a number of different platforms that we possibly could use for portfolios. The portfolio platform that we chose was PebblePad, and that's we've had that since the end of 2017. In 2018, we did some implementation with PebblePad, and it was pretty much left to different users to use whatever they liked. In education, we got very serious about using portfolios. We were fortunate that we actually had a mandate that said portfolios should be used in teacher education, and a teacher's ministerial advisory group identified that every pre-service teacher needed to have a portfolio of evidence. So across 2018, we asked every unit coordinator to use portfolios, not for every assessment task, but at least one assessment task in each unit. So we were looking at that systematic use of portfolios. In 2019, we looked across the university to use portfolios in all sorts of different ways. And as part of that, I moved from the Faculty of Education into an organisation that we call Tasmanian Institute of Teaching and Learning, or TILT. And my job now is to encourage and support people who want to use portfolios, and particularly PebblePad, in their teaching and learning programs. And so that's what we've been doing. And we've had significant success in this area as it's organically been growing across this year, and there is more to come coming up. Okay, so my job particularly is to extend the ways and the context in which PebblePad can be used to increase the student numbers and the staff that are using it for teaching and learning. And I'm also building online support materials. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so you can see that the portfolio approach is very important for what I do, and I see it as a fundamental process when it comes to teaching and learning. And so rather than assessment tasks and activities being a series of hurdles that students have to get through to meet their goal of becoming qualified, we think about the portfolio as being a tangible evidence of the learning journey. So the process of portfolioing and actually going through the collection of evidence and presenting that evidence to audience actually helps students to understand what their course and what their learning experience is about. So they treasure their learning experiences that they have, and it helps them to celebrate their achievements as they travel towards that professional destination. And I like using this image that I have on this slide because it's a Tasmanian waratah, Tilapia truncata. And as it grows and blossoms, that's what we would like our students to do. So that's really what I'm trying to encourage for every discipline in the University of Tasmania. Can I have the next slide, please? So you can see that I've shared some goals here. And so my goals are firstly to extend the ways portfolios are used, because we want to seriously implement it into teaching and learning for every student at the University of Tasmania. We want to change the way that we look at learning, we look at teaching, and we look at portfolios. We building those uses, and particularly diverse uses, because we want to see the different ways portfolios can be used. And I'm responsible of building resources as I go to help academics to do that in their own teaching. Building connections is really important, not only across the university, although that is very important, but beyond the university. So to the other people that we have in this presentation, we are that sort of network that work together. And I think that if all of our staff and our students can benefit from that, that will be really important. The last goal that I've included here is that we have to capture the progress and achievements of our students and of ourselves as well. We have to actually recognise that we are on a learning journey with this. And so my job as a facilitator of portfolios is to actually document this learning journey. And I find that quite tricky, because I can get carried away with the moment and help different people, and then as they become competent, I move on. But I actually have to take the time to portfolio what we're doing and track that learning journey. So I have evidence to show people who are important at the university, but also evidence for us to look back on and reflect on that journey. I have included my my contact details there, and I'm really happy to discuss these concepts with anybody who's interested in talking to me about them.
Fantastic, Jenny. Thank you. I love portfolioing. I don't think I even said it properly. Portfolioing, and which is a very different action to just a habit of mind or folio thinking. It's another addition to that collection of ways that we create and curate content. In terms of how education uses it, and you were talking about how there would be in the beginning just units of work and say assessment as learning tasks being collected and curated. Is there a capstone moment, or is there something toward the end of a program where the students learn to pull all that together and tell that new narrative? Where does that happen in that program?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question. And previously, when I've used portfolios, that certainly has been something that we do. We are collecting this evidence for a capstone that we present. Now, in the portfolio of evidence concept, the goal that we have is occurring all the way through our course. So we have professional standards that the students are meeting and collecting. So those moments of reflection are something that they're doing consistently and recursively as well. It happens across semesters, across years, at different points they look at different things, and we talk about those critical points that they have throughout. In the last year or so, though, we also have an external capstone, which is a teaching performance task that our students need to do, and that also is mandated. And so it's almost like a big portfolio that they do at the end of their course, where they have to demonstrate that they have met all of the standards for the accreditation purposes. And so yes, there is that capstone as we go through, although that is not particularly the purpose. I try and get students to not think about the portfolio as something that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but rather something that occurs at a moment in time. And so they pull together what we call show portfolios at various times. So there's some interesting concepts there, but yes, we do have that moment at the end, and also our students are required to be accredited for teaching purposes, and they need their portfolio for that purpose.
Fantastic, thank you. two very different examples from two quite very different institutions. And now, number 3, Terri, welcome.
Thanks, Catherine. And thank you for inviting me along. Third one is quite different again. And I've been to AAEEBL before, and I did share some of Trobe's work there a few years back, but I'll talk today about transformation at this institution. And when I think about transformation in the portfolio space, we use portfolios in a number of spaces, but the one that comes to mind where the most impact has occurred, I believe, is in our health science disciplines. And you can see from this slide, there's a whole range of disciplines here that I've identified where our portfolio work is impacting, and impacting at different levels. So just to wind back a little bit, with an example where impact has occurred is in our nursing space. And since 2014, which is all of 5 years ago, they've gone leaps and bounds in that space. And just to give you a snapshot of the impact, every year there's at least over 2,000 of our students go out on 5,000 placements, and they're assessed around their competencies in a whole range of professional standards. And so what we've put in place is a portfolio space, and when we talk about portfolios in this space, they're very much, let's say, task-oriented assessment type portfolios. And the big attraction for nursing and for the health sciences is moving away from paper-based systems for clinical assessment in field placements to an online space. That has been the single most attractive carrot for all these disciplines, because they are all doing that as a requirement to meet professional standards. Has the student addressed these standards? And moving from a paper-based system to a digital online system has been very attractive. And each of these disciplines have seen the value and have followed each other. So you can see that there's quite a few. So what are they doing in this space? So maybe if we looked at the next slide, what they're doing, and if I look across all of these different health science disciplines, there's common things and there are unique things happening. The common things that are happening are, well, as I said, clinical assessment for fieldwork, all to the professional standards, but they're all keen on having their records of assessment available, but also having a mechanism where feedback can be recorded for these assessments. And the beauty about this space is that because it's online, we have these other affordances, real-time monitoring. In other words, our teaching staff can review those 2,000 students at any one time, something that was impossible to do with paperwork. So that has opened up quite a different type of monitoring and managing and potentially intervening with students who might be at risk, or just to track cohorts. It's this, these data sets are amazing that we have these affordances now that we didn't have before. From a student point of view now, they are asked quite often to do self-assessments, and you know, reflection is a key part of that. But because it's what I've observed, because it's in this single online space where it's open to people who have access, it's like, because I'm on show, I take more ownership. Other people can review what I've done and where I'm going. And students who move from one placement in 1 year to another placement another year, they can see their progress, and their assessors can review their potentially their previous work. So this is sort of unheard of with paperwork. So I think this part of assessment and reflection has opened up a whole raft of different possibilities. So it's been quite transformative in that sense. So if we go to the next slide. So where to from here, and what have I observed? So as I intimated earlier, the students have seen this as very different from previous assessments. It's a lot more transparent, so they take much more ownership of it. In our oral health space, I've heard staff talking about their students, knowing that they can review their students' work at any point in time and refer back to it, as opposed to documents that are hidden away. And this leads to opportunities for deeper reflective practice, because their previous reflections are open and available for their assessors and their teaching staff. New opportunities have arisen out of this, where now our teaching staff in the health sciences look at this space, and it turns out to be a pebble pad space, where they start looking at different opportunities for assessment, not just clinical, where they may ask, get the students prepare for placement, look at how students might behave, look at preparation for placement, and so that teaching staff are looking at this as a new opportunity to prepare our students so that they have effective placements. The other trend, also in health science, but across the universities, using this space more explicitly for career development and employability, and embedding these opportunities into a vast range of programs. Why have I got this graphic on the screen? I wanted to mention this graphic because one of our health science disciplines, they're using the portfolios as a really nice way they've used it. They ask in prosthetics, they ask the students who are out on placement to prepare a personal portfolio about themselves. And this is the nice part. They actually show their placement supervisors their portfolio and ask for direct feedback whilst they're out on placement. And it's just between themselves and their supervisor, and their supervisor are their potential future employers. And what they do is say, would you hire me based on what you've read in my portfolio? And there's some really beautiful feedback going backwards and forwards. And it's just a conversation between them. And I think it's a really neat way to get direct feedback from a potential employer in a safe environment before they expose their portfolios or their LinkedIn to the rest of the world. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you because I thought that was a lovely way of using a portfolio. If you're interested in any of these pieces of work, you can feel free to contact me on my email below.
Thank you, Terri. And these are documented. Jenny, I don't know if yours are, but are they documented in any of the Pebble Pad spaces in the blog posts or in any of the publications that they have shared as well?
I'm not sure. I can check for you, yeah.
Yeah. And Terri, yours are, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a few there. I'll pick out a few that might be useful.
And certainly I've presented on them in a number of different forums too.
Pebble Pad are very good at sharing their colleagues' work. One thing, Terri, because I've loved how La Trobe's work has changed over time, and it definitely has transformed. The way that you spoke about it at the start is right. I quickly wrote down, you must have seen 3 cohorts of nurses go through with portfolios. Is that right? 3 graduating classes.
Sorry, three cohorts go through.
Yeah.
Yes, over that time period, yes. And we've, you know, we modify things accordingly. But I think it's taken a while for our teaching staff to understand it and look at appreciate the affordances. And it does take a while, Jenny, as you well know. Jenny and I used to work together. But it's not only learning for ourselves, but it's learning for our users, our teaching staff, and they're learning to appreciate it more.
Yeah, in the current Horizon report, there's a great shift. One of the changes or transformations of higher education is the change to teaching practice, which I think that we ePortfolio people would be able to speak about very well. And part of the comment in that is that to change teaching practice, we need infrastructure, but not technological infrastructure. We need the human infrastructure. We need all of the people that sit around how the co-creation happens. Because co-creation in digital fluency and assessment doesn't happen by a teacher and a student. It happens by a facilitator and a learner with a bunch of other people around them. And you sit in that bunch of other people. You are an enabler to ensure that this actually happens. And the work that you've done in health science is amazing. So thank you very much for sharing it. Particularly this professional identity shift that happens at the end after using a portfolio in multiple ways. A really great case. Thank you.
Yeah, and look, I'm just to pick back on what Jenny was saying about the process. The process of portfolio building gives all our users so much more confidence. The portfolio artifact itself is just an artifact. It's the process that's important, and portfolios facilitate that.
Yeah, fantastic. Terri, welcome. Terri with an I.
Hi, thanks, Kate. So yeah, I'm Terri with an I, and I'm a nurse and a midwife, and I'm a lecturer up at University of the Sunshine Coast. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the team that I work with. We're a multidisciplinary community of practice, and we work in both education and health disciplines. And we're based across 7 universities and on 2 continents. So we're constantly in contact via Zoom and other multimedia dimensions. Last year, we completed an initial background search of the literature through a scoping review investigating digital ethics and the use of ePortfolio. And it's the first kind of review in this field. The review considered how the issues of privacy, confidentiality and consent were managed in ePortfolios, where students were engaged with vulnerable and or disadvantaged communities. We found that little is known about the guidance currently provided by educators in relation to the use of sensitive information in ePortfolios, or how indeed students make decisions about what to share using this technology. So taking these issues on board, we found that currently there's only a limited discourse about privacy, repurposing, consent and confidentiality of secondary use of other people's data. For example, students on placement in healthcare or education degrees involve potentially vulnerable groups such as patients and children. And in managing their portfolios, it's actually unclear how students navigate their ethical decision making in relation to vulnerable groups and sharing of inappropriate information, such as images or places that can be identified. So this puts service users, students and universities all at risk. So for another example, students may share with a wider audience than intended, which may be unintentional, or they may not even recognise as a risk when information is shared immediately online through social media. So therefore, we believe that digital ethics support better decision making. So it provides students with values associated with online presence. It considers safe and legal and responsible use of technology. And it also encourages respectful and appropriate language. And the validity of consent and consideration of students' digital footprint and e-professionalism is preparing them ready for graduation. Can we have the next slide, please? So e-portfolios are often used for assessment purposes, which we've seen through our other presenters, and in which the students share their responses within a closed environment, usually with the educator or the person, their facilitator on placement. However, they also given a student's personal learning space, which allows them to share with others. And given this background, we developed a project that had three main aims. So the main aims of our project were, firstly, we wanted to understand the current practices across institutions and related challenges. And we wanted to identify intended and unintended outcomes of e-portfolio practice relating to the vulnerable groups. And then thirdly, we wanted to develop guidelines to be used by faculty and students to address unintended negative outcomes. So in order to investigate this, we used a mixed method approach, which included surveys and interviews and focus groups with quite a large number of students and or educators across all our universities. And of course, we did achieve ethical approval, which is another story in itself, using so many different universities. What students reported was that typically they were careful with sensitive data from workplace learning placements, despite a third of the students reporting being given no guidance on ethical issues when working with vulnerable populations. A third also did not ask for consent to use images or information about vulnerable people whom they were working. And about 40% reported, only 40% reported securing their computer when using images or information. What the educators reported was that they did inform students repeatedly via different means, via email, personal reminders in class, etc., around the kind of evidence that could or could not be used and that safeguards around the different types of evidence. Secondly, the educators said that they supported ethical decision-making processes for students to determine what and when e-portfolio content was appropriate for online sharing. And finally, that all students working with vulnerable communities needed to know prior to any placement how to document evidence that would not compromise confidentiality. So that leads us to the big picture. If we could have the next slide, please. So what typically provided, there is a much bigger picture emerging for the next generation of e-portfolio users, and that is the decision-making process used to determine what is appropriate to share online and when. For example, we need to consider the potential of the repurposing of material as part of course requirements used for showcasing to future employers, as Terri mentioned just now, or to support ongoing professional development. So a key consideration is whether consent to use the material at the point of assessment is sufficient when students are using their portfolios, or should we be asking clients from vulnerable populations for the option to use their images in the future for potentially repurposed circumstances. So tertiary institutions really need to support building digitally ethical practices with students and staff to support a sound decision-making process when publishing online. And currently, our team is developing a list of critical factors in the development of our exemplar guidelines. And we do hope these will go out for public comment at the end of our winter, so your summer in America, for implementation in 2020 and beyond. And we believe that further research will support best digital ethic practices to support students' decision-making processes when using e-portfolios. So thank you. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact either myself or Misty. And Misty's the program lead investigator on this project, and both of our contact details are on this slide. And the list of 7 universities is across the bottom. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terri. So this is going to be picked up again at AAEEBL, and it came out of our e-portfolio meeting at AAC and you in January. As a digital humanities, arts and social science researcher here at the University of Melbourne, again, another issue that we're dealing with as researchers around ethical use of digital data. And digital data was something that Terri Young also spoke about before, and the implications and literacies and then fluencies of those aspects of data are really important things for us to teach. But it does mean that we need to be teaching, like all of you have talked about, what it is that we're doing explicitly. When you're working in digital environments, it's very easy to actually sometimes assume that the digital space or digital ecology is somehow similar to the physical one, and they're very different environments, and we've somehow skipped a little bit on the issues, and then ended up in dilemmas like this where we've now had to backtrack some things. I know some portfolios in other institutions that have had to be quickly shut down because lab information, for instance, in a lab report has been published without the consent of the owner of the lab. You know, there are really important things to consider. And I think going back to this report in higher ed at the moment, that this aspect of digital fluency is one of them. Ethics sits inside digital literacies, but we haven't been so great at teaching the civic and community responsibilities in the literacies. And now we're in a place where we're asking people to be fluent, to co-create, co-curate, and we've got some problems. It's a really great study. Is there something that has resonated with you for your teaching out of a study like this, and that might have shifted your practice?
I think for me, it was a case of we really need to be extremely clear that the students do understand what it is they can and can't share. As you can imagine, in nursing and midwifery, most students are with vulnerable populations, and if they were to take a photograph of, say, a woman holding a baby, even if she gave them permission, they might go on and repurpose that for something else. And we've actually had to pick students up in the past that might have shared on Facebook or something in their excitement, or, oh, look, this was the first baby I caught, or something like that. So, you know, it is important that they understand it's not just in their portfolio, that they need to be aware. They need to be aware for their own social media practices as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So that's the end. That's a QR code for you to go back and jump into ePortfolios Australia and connect to what's happening on this side of the planet in the global south, and have a look at what our ePortfolio practices and research looks like. My email is there if you have skipped quickly noting down how to contact my colleagues, but it will also be on the AAEEBL website, and there'll be details on how to contact us in the AAEEBL Facebook page. I hope that you enjoy the conversation that follows with Helen and Tracy, and please stay in contact so that we can hear what comes out of a session like this. And how it might impact on your practice on the other side of the world. Thanks very much.